host, and I'm going to let our guest speaker today, Chris Cook, kind of tell you a little bit about himself, what got him interested in the Civil War. I believe you had some ancestors that fought during the Civil War, so take it away.
So my name's Chris Cook. I am a Virginia resident, and that's about all I can claim as far as my expertise go. I am a Civil War enthusiast, general history nerd, as well as just global politics and military enthusiast. So I did have ancestors that fought in the war, which got me started in the Civil War reenacting hobby. I know that there's a bit of contention between, reenactors and like actual booksmarks academic historians. I believe that having both backgrounds really does bring it all together for a total perspective on the war and for how to appreciate what these men actually went through. Of course, we can never get as close as they were to the experiences, but even just a little bit is sharing that appreciation for what they went through and understanding of, just how far these guys went for their causes and how much they endured. But yeah, I had three ancestors that fought in the Civil War. All of them were captains. One was actually promoted to a lieutenant colonel, John E. Cook of the 76th New York. And then I had two other ancestors of the Mumford family. Oliver and James Mumford were both of the 141st PA and the 56th PA. Actually, funny enough, the chairs that we're sitting on today are from the Mumford family funeral home, who's the son of Oliver and Mumford actually founded. They're quite old, so.
Did not know that.
On the back it has MFH, so.
That's pretty neat. Cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, little family heirlooms we get to squat on. So many a tear was shed on these chairs.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So what would you say? You said, you had global history. What is your niche favorite part of global history?
So definitely the Industrial Revolution, the 1800s to the turn of the century. Fascinating time period. There's so much going on, especially in our country, which is what we're going to be speaking on today, which is the kickoff of the war and the lead up to Manassas. The thing that fascinates me primarily with this period in history globally is that you have, like I said, the Industrial Revolution was really changing everything, from politics, society, economics, of course, and then military engineering.
Yeah.
It had a huge impact, and in many ways, our ancestors who were living through this time really, some were able to understand and appreciate what was going on. But a lot of others couldn't. They really were stuck in the past.
Yeah.
And some countries would adapt, change, and evolve, and some wouldn't. Greatest example of that would be our country, fighting through its growing pains, so to speak, to put it mildly. Of course, we had a lot of deaths in order to get to where we are now. But other countries, such as Russia, really wouldn't get there until the very end of the Tsardom. Which was well overdue for social, political, and economic change in that country. So if you, from a global perspective, if you look at our country versus other countries on Earth at this time period, of course the British were dominant. But you had a lot of countries that were handling it in totally different ways, and then some countries that were just totally left behind and then got subsumed and absorbed into the larger empires.
Yeah, to kind of one of the points that we'll be talking about today is the introduction to the cotton gin. And how that really plays a pivotal role in kind of the direction that the Southern culture takes during this time. Before we get on to that, I think that's going to be our intro right there. My name is Luis Martinez. I run the page, The Civil War Wanderer, on YouTube and on Instagram, and a TikTok meme page by the same name. But I am from El Salvador. I didn't have any ancestors that fought in the Civil War, but growing up in Virginia, my father would always take us out to battlefields, and, like many other reenactors and Civil War enthusiasts, I watched Gettysburg, and that was kind of it for me, kind of got hooked onto it. I joined the Army, and I was a cavalry scout, and one of the deciding factors of me choosing to be a cavalry scout was because you can trace their lineage back to, even before the Civil War, and they kept the traditions alive, and I just thought that was really neat. So, but getting out of the Army, coming back, I've really kind of thrown myself into reenacting, into Civil War history, and now content creation. But that's just that's me. But let's go into the conversation of this Industrial Revolution, right?
Yeah.
And then the cotton gin. Because one thing that I was reading up on was basically, you have these slave owners at the founding of America, like Washington, Jefferson, who actually are pretty, they view slavery as that necessary evil. And Washington is very, in his private diaries and letters, he's very spoken against slavery. He didn't do that outwardly very much at all. He was concerned that he was aware of the influence that he had, but that's not to say that even if you look, he kept records of everything, and to him, plantation farming wasn't a sustainable way to have to become more rich, or to become a what's the word I'm looking for? It just wasn't sustainable. Yeah, profit for slaves. Yeah,
it wasn't feeding back into the economy.
Yeah, Washington was famous for really taking care of his slaves, but even he does the math that even at the level of like minimum care for the slaves, it was still eating into the profit margins of having a plantation. Jefferson also was outspoken against slavery. He actually footed a bill in, forget the year, but it was with Franklin, that outlawed slavery, importation of slaves in Virginia in the late 1780s, I want to say.
I think it was
1790s.
It would have been somewhere near 1798, I believe.
Yeah.
Or earlier. Yeah, the exact date eludes me. Prior to the government actually getting around to the 1808 importation ban, individual states like Virginia actually went out of their way to ban the importation of slaves, not the slave trade itself, but the importation from Africa and other European countries. The idea too came from the early abolition movement, if you can reference it as such. In the New England states, in their drafting of their new state constitutions, outright banned it, such as Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yeah, that's
one of the first states to even just outright ban it completely. Of course, there was always the lingering issue of what happens if they escape. What happens if one were to escape and run up to a northern state which may or may not have that ban in place?
Yeah.
That would become a conversation down the road, which would feed into the causes of the war.
Well, here's one thing. We did have a fugitive slave law before the one that we get with the 1850 Compromise?
That would have been, 1856, I believe, or 1854.
Yeah, but so before we had the fugitive slave law that we think
the notorious one.
Yeah, we did have one beforehand, but it didn't really have teeth. You had to go through a judiciary system, and you had to prove that the slave that you were claiming was actually yours. But kind of going back a little bit, so we're talking about Washington, we're talking about Jefferson. Washington, hoping that his neighbors kind of fall suit when he dies, he frees his slaves. He didn't beforehand because there was this thing called manumission he wasn't allowed to free his slaves. He could only sell them, but he didn't want to sell them either. So Washington, hoping to set an example, upon his death, he frees his slaves, and he's really hoping that kind of picks up with his neighbors. And you have Virginia, passing that, not having the importation.
Yeah.
It really shows you kind of that this generation of the founding fathers really did view slavery as like a necessary evil. It's very clear that they were kind of just hoping that it would be taken care of in the legislature down the line. But it doesn't happen that way. And going back to the cotton gin, something that changed as the generations, so the kids and the grandkids of the founding fathers, kind of do like a 180 of that mentality, especially when the cotton gin is introduced, because now you are producing so much more cotton and able to sell it more. And also the price of cotton is kind of skyrocketing out in Europe. I don't know if you want to touch a little bit on that.
So before, up until the cotton gin, cotton was a pretty successful crop, but it was extremely hard for laborers to actually pick the actual seeds out of the cotton and be able to manufacture it more efficiently, which led to a lot of people actually wondering whether or not it would be economically viable to continue that, or to switch to more. Unfortunately, that leads to subsistence farming too when you have failed crops. The collapse of tobacco is really what kind of interests me with this period. The fact that Washington himself tried to make cash crops of tobacco, they failed. The southern states are having to readjust to economic changes, but the cotton gin, that once that came out, being able to process the cotton and be able to get it through there and be able to actually send it off in a complete bale. It ramped up the purchase and the it's interesting. I'm trying to formulate the idea around it. I'm not exactly sure if I've heard this said before, but Eli Whitney was looking to try to make cotton manufacturing more efficient. Therefore, the idea would be that you really don't need as many slaves in order to produce the cotton because you won't need as many hands on it. Unfortunately,
backfired if that was the mentality.
If that was the intent, which I have yet to see substantial evidence to say that was his intent. Obviously, it was just patenting and making money and efficiency. But it really does backfire on that concept, and it creates a new market, a resurgence of slave ownership of the lucrative market, which would be slavery, to ramp up the cotton production of the South. And that's that change you get in the 1830s, 1840s, where suddenly cotton is becoming an absolute boom market. It's becoming a boom economy.
Well, now plantation owners and slave owners are able to compensate for that overhead that was being eaten into beforehand. So now you have this incredibly successful, crop that's come around.
And it creates this single product economy in the South. Which leads to, more cotton plantations. The further we expand west, the more expectation there is for slave purchasing and for cotton production, even though we then come to find out that some of those states are not suited for cotton production.
Well, and that's the whole thing with the what's that line?
The Mason-Dixon
line. Yeah.
Well, before that, the Missouri Compromise.
Yep.
Anything north of this parallel is going to be free state. Anything south of it is going to be slave state.
And so that kind of worked out. And people look at the Missouri Compromise at that time as kind of like a win-win, because at that time, not anything, but a lot of territories north of that just weren't sustainable for that type of plantation mentality, So let's talk a little bit about the Western expansion of things and kind of setting the stage for 1860.
So just manifest destiny, baby. You want to go further, claim everything you can, damn to the people who live there. That's kind of where we were headed. All the bluster and gusto about anti-European imperialism and free country and going out and basically claiming a stake west of the country was our dream at that time. There were people who were against it. There were politicians at the time that were thoroughly against expanding west, but unfortunately, I guess it depends on how you put it. Their opinions kind of died off or were overcrowded by the ones who wanted to go further west. In essence, the entire debate revolved around electoral votes, around power in Congress, about Senate seats. So what happens when you start taking over all of these Western territories and you start formalizing them, you start giving them a government and having them establish their own state, and then admitting them into the Union? What happens to the balance of power with the Southern the Southern planters, the Southern Democrats and the Northern Whigs, or the Northern parties? They're really the free states, in other words. The balance between those was always really, really fragile. But then as we're moving west and spreading ourselves off into the unknown, and even though we come up with the Missouri Compromise, it's not enough, because what happens is you find out that there's a lot more space and a lot more states that can be made in the north than in the south, because we start learning seeing the full picture geographically of what we're looking at.
And you're getting, these land that we start to acquire, like California with after the Mexican-American War, you have the Louisiana Purchase, you start getting the Northwest Territories, Oregon, which at this point hadn't been
It was a dispute with England.
It was a dispute.
Yeah.
So,
the idea that you could keep a total balance just by having states free and slave along that parallel became a fiction.
Yeah,
it became a problem for the South, especially, and that's kind of what ramps up the tensions. It turns up the temperature in the country, because then you start seeing certain legislation being passed by the North that really comes down hard on the South, such as the tariffing.
Yeah.
That would eventually take place, the tariffs of abomination.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a funny story with Andrew Jackson on that one.
Yeah. You want to start that off, because I know you were talking about it earlier.
So the way I have it understood is that the Southern Democrats actually, it was kind of a ploy, because they were upset that they were getting tariffed. So they said, okay, well, we're gonna put out this bill, and there's going to have Southern support for it, but it's going to be tariffs on industry from the North. Mm-hmm. And their thought being was like, oh, the North's not going to stand for that. They're going to want to, kill the bill, and then the Southerners will pull out from support, and then it'll kind of be like, it's not the Southerners that don't want to play nice, it's the Northern states.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's funny, the Northern states are kind of just like, okay, well,
I like this.
we can do that, So it completely backfires on them. And
it's funny, because the original intent was to put a tax on importations primarily from England, of raw materials.
Yeah.
Because we were finding that we were importing a lot more from England than the New England states could make economically viable. So actually, I may be wrong, but I think, if I remember correctly, it was the northern states that actually proposed and wanted to establish a tariff for importation of foreign raw materials. The South hated it, because what happened was they had a very limited manufacturing economy, as will kind of kick them in the butt, moving further down towards.
You can say ass.
Yeah,
we can say ass.
It's going to kick them.
These PG-13 ish.
A triple S. So
ancient devil hockey.
So the North is they're generally in favor of these tariffs. The South is not, because virtually all the manufacturing and importation of manufactured goods come from Europe to feed the Southern economy for their plantation efforts, because they're not terribly interested in starting up huge amounts of manufacturing in the South due to that single product economy that their entire
absolutely hangs on. Yeah.
However, when the Southern Democrats decided to try to jump on board with a further tariff bill, the one you're speaking of, they were expecting the New England states to throw a fit, because they thought, well, if we're going to get taxed more, this is unfair, And the Democrats even pitch in and writing the bill to make it as horrible as humanly possible. They're like, yeah, we're going to help you out. Give me the pen. Let me write something down real quick. 100% on this good and that good. And, I don't know who was in charge of that bill, but they basically, I think it was Clay. I think it was Clay. I think it was
Henry Clay.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it was Clay. But
he was very active during this time.
Very active. So anyway, they're like, let's make a bill so terrible and so ruinous for the North, at least optically, it seems like it's going to be, that they're going to throw a fit and they're going to kill the bill, and then basically the Southern Democrats get to say, well, they didn't want it. We tried, and they don't want it. So I guess we got to start rolling back all the tariffs. Day comes for a decision. And they vote for the bill.
It's passed.
And they pass the bill. And the Southern Democrats are enraged that they actually got this thing passed when they were the ones pushing it. So they basically took a shotgun and shot themselves in the mouth. Yeah. Turns out it really didn't actually have a whole lot of bad impact in the long run. No. However, in the short term, they went to a specific guy to try to get it repealed once he was elected.
Yeah, so that's when we get Andrew Jackson, who was a slave owner. But Andrew Jackson was a very, what's the word I'm looking for?
He was a piece of work.
He was a piece of work. Yeah, strong. Well, he was a unionist.
Convictions.
Yeah,
he was a soldier. If you ever challenged him, as we know, he would fight right back.
So South Carolina starts to throw the word secession around, and this is
it's in the 1830s, I think.
Yeah.
So they basically they demand that the tariffs be repealed. Otherwise, they're going to secede.
We might start thinking about leaving the union.
Yeah, leave. And then Andrew Jackson basically is like, okay, I will raise up an army. I will go down to South Carolina. I will go to Charleston, and I will start hanging all the people that want the nullification. And
Jackson being never a man to back down from his word,
not shy away from a fight,
quite seriously by the Southern Democrats.
So South Carolina, yeah, they're like, okay.
And they said, maybe not. Let's just hold off on that secession question for the minute, before we end up getting good old Jackson
down there
to beat us up and hang our people.
So that happens. So kind of gives us a little bit. So now
the first serious, I think. Well, no, it wouldn't be the first serious discussion about secession, but as far as in the narrative,
in the narrative
that
of
we're building
this,
here, up to the 1860 election, it's just another piece of kindling on the fire to start it off.
So I like to point at 1850 as kind of the point where we're starting to get to reach that point of no return with division between the North and the South. You want to talk a little bit about what goes on in 1850?
Oh yeah. So that was that the mark of the Missouri Compromise.
So that's when the Missouri Compromise was. That's when we got the Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Yeah. Kansas-Nebraska
Act, and then the new Fugitive Slave Act.
Yep.
So
1850 marks more hostilities concerning the territories, and the question of the Missouri Compromise comes into play, where they start to realize this. I mean, the South especially starts to realize that we're starting to lose our grip on power that we've had for so long, and the ability to steer the country and the narrative away from slavery and just more mundane things like going to war with Mexico.
Which it is. But I do want to note that at this time in Congress, even though there was more like northern seats, they were still passing these laws that were kind of in favor of Southern politics. So a lot of Northerners quietly at this time, and that's why I won't focus on 1850, but before this point, they're kind of like afraid that their government really is kind of this,
it's being held
hostage by Southern politics. Then you have stuff like the Dred Scott decision, which was done by the Supreme Court. We'll get into that after this.
So the Fugitive Slave Act, combined with the territorial disputes out west, the territorial disputes. I'll just go back to that real quick, and I'll kind of sum it up in a nutshell. It was determined that going along that parallel was not going to work for deciding whether or not you could have a slave state or free state. Suddenly we get the idea of self-determination. What is it? Self-sovereignty. Popular sovereignty that comes into play, where the decision is made that, we can admit these territories as states, but they need to decide, the people there need to decide whether or not they want to be admitted as a slave or a free state, essentially. There are many different political ideologies in between, such as free soilers, and then Southerners who move to these territories that don't particularly care about slavery.
The border ruffians.
The border ruffians were the extreme too. So we get this instance in Kansas where suddenly a lot of Missourians are moving into the state, trying to influence the decision making for admittance to the Union.
So for context, Missouri at this point is a slave state, but it is bordering Kansas. So I just wanted to give that context that they were going right next to that territory.
It's hard to imagine if you have a map in front of you, especially when you start getting out towards Kansas, where all the states start looking like rectangles. Just imagine a very simple square. That's your state. So essentially, a lot of these specific details kind of elude me at the moment, but essentially this causes a stir in Washington, where now you're starting to see, well, how are we going to start pushing the balance of power between the slave states and the free states in the North? And it further divides the politics between that issue specifically. And then you got the Dred Scott case and the Fugitive Slave Act. Those come along. The Fugitive Slave Act especially causes a huge stir in the northern states, especially free states, who consider themselves now under the oppression of Southern legalese and Southern politics.
Yeah, because they're now forced to comply with any
Capturing
any capture of the slaves,
any escaped slaves, and the margins and the proof for deciding whether or not somebody had escaped and whether or not they deserved to be put back into slavery is extremely thin.
Oh, it's just based off the testament of the owner. Yeah.
So you could feasibly just capture somebody who's been a freeman for decades and say, "Oh, well, they need to go right back to the plantation." Yeah, and they need to go back to the plantation, and legally speaking, because of the Fugitive Slave Act and the Dred Scott decision with the Supreme Court, suddenly these northern states are forced to comply with, let's say, South Carolina's decision that they need to be extradited back to the slave state.
This is when you also see a lot of African Americans, ironically, fleeing to Imperial Canada.
Yeah,
it's
they need
ironic.
to go somewhere where it's completely abolished, and Canada was one of the only places in the area that
was still
Canada
British territory.
Yeah.
At that time, right?
Yeah.
And England had abolished slavery in 1838, I believe.
Yeah, fully. Yeah.
Fully.
And that was for the entire empire at that point.
Yeah.
Although England,
except for India, I feel there was like a weird thing with India, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was still servitude, but to a different degree. England had, just a quick note, England had abolished slavery even before then, but for the entire empire, it becomes official later on.
We should dig into the India question later on.
Interesting conversation. Yeah, the British Empire as a whole is a huge, complex conundrum of different rules contradicting one another, depending on what the mainland is doing versus the colonies. Yeah. But anyway,
back
to
spend hours on that.
Suddenly, imagine you're just a northern citizen, and suddenly you get a knock on your door, and you are being told that a farmhand that works on your farm up in, like, let's say, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Suddenly you're getting told, hey, listen, we're slave catchers we're duly deputized from the state of South Carolina, whatever county. We have here in our hands a possession of a written affidavit saying that the black freedman who's second generation freedman living on your plantation or on your farm needs to be picked up. We're going to take him. We're going to bring him back and put him into servitude on a plantation in the South. Legally speaking, you can't do a damn thing about it.
No.
You have to comply. And that's what drives the northern states to become even more abolitionist. A fringe idea at the time, a very few minority up until this point. There were publications for abolition. There were people speaking out about it, but it doesn't become a full-fledged, full political movement until this point. This is kind of the turning of the dial.
I think that's kind of like when they really turned the heat up on that mentality.
Yeah, because before then, the South was far more interested in maintaining slavery than the North was ever interested in abolishing it. But then suddenly these things come out, the Western Territory disputes and the Fugitive Slave Act, light the fire under a lot of butts in the north.
It's kind of ironic because these southern winds, with these two things, is what creates the thing that they are actually afraid of, which is having that northern abolitionist movement growing.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's not even about slavery in the north. It's about power. It's about states being able to control each other's politics and law. The Dred Scott case, probably the most disastrous.
I actually want to talk about that because I want to pull up the quote from
ruinous decision.
The
most ruinous decision in our country's history.
Yeah,
based on racial and political, but mostly legal lines. That was horrible decision.
I want to.
And there's a lot to be said that Buchanan, the president at the time, the famous Do Nothing Buchanan, had a hand in even swaying the Supreme Court's decision to agreeing in the Dred Scott case. But
I'm looking for a quote that I heard on the way here. Here we go. This is from the exact excerpt from the ruling. Time to elaborate on the legal and social status of Black Americans at the time of the nation's founding. And I quote, "They had for more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. So it completely strips any sense of humanity from the slaves or free men in the United States at this point.
And that opinion is not even grounded in, I might say, I mean, maybe some people can find evidence to reason why they thought that, but in my opinion, even historically speaking, there's no reason to even assert that. No. There's no legal standard to assert that. That's metaphysical and racial prejudice. Mm-hmm. Absolutely anti-legal, in my opinion.
Well, this is when you really start seeing that slavery coming hand in hand with that spiritual undertone, you know, and people
and the tentacles of the South seem to be gripping the North to the point where we start seeing, like I said, just an explosion of abolition movement.
It's funny. Everyone's like, "Oh, the Civil War, states' rights." Well, really, I mean, the one that was
ironically,
the encroaching of political powers of states' rights was really the South. Kind of holding them within a chokehold.
Yeah, and the assertion of power, like I said, and just like the Western territorial disputes, like Bleeding Kansas and the self-sovereignty, you popular sovereignty in those states, you have a lot of issues coming around in a very short period of time, and this is what made it so interesting, but also so challenging to research this time period. There's so much happening in the period of like 10 or 6 years. Even shorter than that, so many things coming together to cause the secession that are just one after the other, a nonstop cascade of issues.
Just a domino effect. You get that first domino, and it just kind of just all falls apart.
Yeah. So I mean, the public is being steered in the South by publications coming out of Charleston and other places. Riling people up and trying to send them out to the Western territories to please go out there, fight to make this a Southern, not even a slave state at that point, just make it Southern, keep our culture the dominant one in the country. And you get this cultural divide just as much as it is a racial and
which again, that culture was fairly new at this point, because again, that generation of the founding fathers they were already putting in these avenues to get away from slavery in the long run. And then, like we mentioned before, you know, the cotton gin and the prices and the benefit of cotton and the prices that it's reaching just completely creates
cotton economically too. At this point, I believe I've seen numbers where it's 70% of world exports for cotton production come out of the South in the United States. That's extreme. Imagine anything threatening that. In a modern perspective, think Saudi Arabia and oil.
Yeah.
Imagine if Saudi Arabia just couldn't do anything with oil anymore.
Yeah.
They just lost the production. They're not able to
collapse. It would implode.
Absolutely collapse. Absolutely. Yeah. So there was a real, genuine fear. Not even just racial. Of course, there is the racial fear. But economically, if the North ever tried to stop this money train, we're just gonna the entire economy.
I do want to clarify that industry in the North did absolutely benefit from the South 100%. Slavery and cotton. I do. Yeah. I don't like
loans,
this.
Bankers in New York were still funding plantations in the South and enterprises in the West.
I don't like this picture that's painted, with kind of like a clean issue where it's just like the North was 100% against slavery and hated it, and the South was there was a mutual benefit relationship between Northern industry and Southern agricultural economic.
But the future the imagined cause and effect here would be if the South were to lose the ability to keep slaves. The implications and the repercussions would be far greater in the South than in the North.
Yeah,
that goes beyond saying. But
absolutely.
That fear was genuine. There were quite a few Northerners who simply didn't care about slavery, or would even just be supportive of it because they don't want free black men.
I'm about to say, I think this is a good moment to talk about Liberia.
Yeah,
there was an effort. It was the American there was AC
the American Colonization
Society. Yeah, ACS. Yeah, the ACS that basically was like, well, we don't necessarily want all these freed black men, here. But there's no good way to say that.
Yeah, it's almost comedic when you think about it.
It's a very
It's not for the people who lived it. But for sure. I mean, just in a kind of caricature way.
It reminds me of like that episode of SpongeBob where Patrick's like,
Let's just take the bottom
and push it over there. Yes, it's kind of the same concept, and it's
why don't we just
simplicity.
Why don't we just take all the black people and send them back
to Africa? So the idea of the ACS, their mission was to create a colony in Africa. It was in Africa, right? Yeah, it was in Africa, of course. Yeah. And it was called
West Coast
Liberia. Yeah, West Coast. Which is it still?
Yeah, it's still there.
It's still there.
It's nothing like it used to be. But the idea that you're going to take, I mean, even
so the concept was that they would help the black community in the United States to go back to where they came from, back home, in this colony of Liberia.
A lot of these people are like several generations deep.
3 or 4 or 5 generations into, so all they know
they
is
are
the
more
United
American
States.
than many of the new immigrants coming into the country who are now politicians or people in decision-making power. Oh, let's just take them and
send them over there.
Send them back. No.
But all that to paint this picture that it wasn't as clean of a cut line as
just North
you learn in high school. Yeah, you learn in high school history. I mean, you got the draft riots of '63, which we'll talk. I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Tons of nuances and tons of different perspectives.
Those
so
Irish.
we got to send the Irish back to Ireland. Imagine you take McClellan and you send him back to Ireland. Don't you want to go back to the old country? Wouldn't it be lovely? I know under starvation.
To be fair, Mar's plan was to go back to Ireland and fight the British out there. That's
one guy. I'm sure there was that one guy on the ship to Liberia who was like, but the rest are like, what are you so excited about?
Yeah, it was like they know nothing of Africa.
Go back home. They say I want to go back home.
Nothing at this point. Most of these slaves have been born in the United States, and so it's home for them. Okay, so we just talked about causes. Okay, so let's jump forward. Oh, wait. We kept talking about the Bleeding Kansas. That's the first time really on a big scale that we get this guy in the picture named John Brown. Chris, how do you feel about John Brown? Let's give the context of who he is, what he did in Kansas.
He did some things.
He did some
things.
Do you want to hold a sword?
The big one, the broadsword. This is going to sound really nutty to some people, but I love John Brown.
He was absolute kook.
He was true.
Is that a derogatory term?
Nah, I don't know.
Kook?
No. The thing about John Brown was he was completely bought into his convictions and saw slavery as a deep, deep evil, and he held to that. And that's why I respect him, is that he had the fire in his gut he committed a lot of crimes, a lot of atrocities, but he knew what he wanted, and that was to destroy slavery utterly, completely. Yeah. He was basically like what all of the abolitionists wanted to be, but really couldn't, because there's something called the law.
He's also I feel like he's also what every Southerner thought every Northerner was like.
Yes,
he wasn't.
He was the propaganda monster for the South.
Well, so he gets to Kansas. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things happen in Kansas. You have the siege of Lawrence. You have
the sacking of Lawrence.
The sacking of Lawrence.
You got to call it by its
propaganda.
The sacking of Lawrence.
But so John Brown, he murders a whole family, basically.
Yeah. It's what you do. It's what you do out in Kansas. And where was that? Charles texted me because he wanted to remind me how bad John Brown was.
Oh, really?
Potawatomi Creek. Yeah. He goes down there, and in retaliation, as he sees it for Lawrence, he goes and he slaughters a whole family of him and his sons, and a few supporters go, and they hack him to bits, and they shoot him, and they kill him, and it's a terrible tragedy, just like everything else that was going on in Kansas at that time. The reason they call it Bleeding Kansas is not because everybody was in a room talking out their feelings. It was because they were hacking each other to death and shooting each other.
A lot of people will point to Bleeding Kansas 57 as like the year the Civil War actually started.
Yeah, and for those who are just like still confused by all the politics and the happenings of this time, Kansas was being flooded by external forces, by border ruffians from Missouri, like we said, the state that borders it, that had recently become a slave state. They're being basically, there was a perfect example of this in recent politics. I can't really remember. Imagine there's a protest going on, and that protest suddenly gets flooded in by external people from out of state that have never been to the city before, and they start bringing in bricks, and they start bringing in Molotov cocktails, and then, you know what, why don't we bring a gun or two? And then suddenly it becomes not a protest, it's a riot.
It's this powder
riot. And then, well, of course we need the other people to come, so the other side shows up with their bats and bricks and hatchets, and they start going to town. And the only difference is, in modern society, we have something called the police to put that to rest after a while. It can get pretty bad. Yeah. But back then, Kansas didn't have anything like
territory. It was just
so they just kind of went to town and started attacking each other incessantly until finally federal troops were brought in to try to quell it in certain areas. But really, throughout the Civil War, Kansas is never kind of put to rights until the end of it.
Which is funny because it becomes a state in 61.
Yeah.
But up through 65, it's still fighting within its borders.
So that's part of the whole Western territories debate that we were talking about. But John Brown, he goes on to Harper's Ferry. Of course, we all know the story. In 59, which is close because our real story here starts in 60.
Yeah.
But he goes to Harper's Ferry with a few followers and his sons. He goes there, and his idea is to capture the arsenal there at Harper's Ferry, and to call upon all the local slaves in the area.
Yeah, he sends out messengers to slaves at the plantations
to rise up and come to Harper's Ferry. We're going to arm you. We're going to start a slave revolt. We're going to march all the way down through the South and liberate every slave that we can. Yeah. And we're going to put those dirty slavers up on trees, and we're going to, So he has this grand plan. One could call it a delusion, but a grand plan in his mind that he's going to be the savior of the slaves.
Yeah.
He goes down to Harper's Ferry. They raid the arsenal and then immediately get cornered.
By who?
By Robert E. Lee.
By Robert E. Lee. He's leading a unit of Marines.
And local citizens. Yeah. Local citizens arm themselves and start fighting back, which keeps him penned in at the arsenal until Robert E. Lee comes in with his troops from the state of Virginia to put down the revolt as they saw it. But there's two takeaways from this. John Brown was the tip of the spear, in my opinion, for the abolition movement.
Yeah.
He was the radical embodiment of a growing political movement in the North, something that wasn't really a thing up until the 50s. And I mean that in the kind of sense, really, because there were people who were abolitionists.
Well, you had Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
I'd say John Brown was
there were abolitionists. I mean,
as attacking
a political force. And he's kind of the embodiment of it, in my opinion, the most radical version of it. Secondly, it's a huge propaganda win for the South. It rallies a lot of people behind the idea that we can never free these slaves; they'll come and kill us. And that and the idea that, well, the North is also sending agents to try to rally servile insurrection and kill us in our beds. They're going to take everything away. They're going to burn our plantations down. They're going to ruin the economy, and they're going to kill us.
Yeah.
There's two reasons, and this is it's interesting. I was telling this story to a friend who's not politically savvy or historically savvy or politically savvy, and he was like, "That's silly. That's a silly idea. Why would they ever think that why would they ever think that suddenly all the blacks were going to rise up and kill us in our beds and destroy the South?" Well, there's actual
internationally
that had happened.
Like Haiti,
that had happened down in Haiti in the 70s, in the early French Revolution, and under Napoleon, the Haitian Revolution, which is only a few decades apart from this.
It's
still fresh in the minds of everybody. And then for the educated, classically educated Southerners and a lot of the aristocrats who went through classical education, they remember the servile insurrections of Spartacus and how they basically went around and massacred all the slaveholders. So this was a real fear. It was a genuine fear, however misguided. they did actually believe that John Brown was evidence of a plot to create this sort of climate in the South.
There was a tangible moment to point at now for that fear and to be grounded.
It launched it into a whole new conversation. It launched slavery into a whole new conversation and secession eventually.
At this point, slavery could no longer be tucked away into Congress, and
I hope you all enjoyed this first episode of the Between the Battle Lines podcast. We are excited to bring you a more casual conversation about the Civil War, its battles, its people, and all of the in-between. See you next time.